RX Television on RXMuscle.com. This is Iron Debate, the new format of Iron Debate, a one-topic Iron Debate. I'm your host, Sadiq Faruqi. We are going to be debating a topic that has increased in terms of its magnitude and overall discussion over the course of the week. We are joined by IFBB Pro Gerald Williams, the man they call the technician, Chris Aceto, the man they call boss number 2, John Romano, and of course, in our Cape Coral, Florida studios, we have Dave Palumbo, the man with the final word on all topics. This past weekend, Rich Piana, a voicemail was leaked. Now, it was found that that voicemail was from 10 years ago, and by now, anybody that's in the know in the bodybuilding world knows what was said in that voicemail, and there have been all sorts of heated debates as far as, what should be said, what should be done about Rich Piana. Of course, he delivered an apology video the next day, indicating that it was in a fit of rage, it was 10 years ago, and that those words in no way represent what he truly feels or his character. In this week, we have had 3 videos rather, relating to this topic. We had Lee Priest come on. Lee Haney was invited to come on, but he instead chose to give a message that Dave delivered on the air and then responded to. And then yesterday, John Romano came on and gave his thoughts on this. Well, we are joined again, like I said, by Gerald Williams and Chris Aceto. Now, what's important as Gerald, we're going to go to you first on this one. We've been getting a lot of comments, both for and against the content that we've put out. And one of the strongest sentiments that we have gotten so far is that we have not had an African-American voice come on and address this topic, and you're getting the platform for this. What do you make of what Rich Piana said, the fact that it was 10 years ago?
Sid, I want to interrupt you for a minute. I think it's important because not everyone has seen all these shows. This might be the first time they're tuning in. It's important to let everyone know that we're talking about is Rich Piana's racist phone call where he uses the N-word repeatedly, screaming at his ex-wife. Ostensibly, it's from 10 years ago. There's also rumors that there was another voice message released as well that had the same racist comments in there. And, we had a lot of people this past week on the show giving their opinions on it. And now I kind of wanted to do a recap of it. I know some people don't want to hear about it anymore, but you know what? It's a very important topic. You can't brush this under the carpet. I want to not only have Gerald Williams input on it, but then I want to debate what was said, because a lot of people are controversially either upset or in favor of what was said this past week by both John Romano, Lee Priest, Greg Valentino, Lee Haney, myself, Chris Aceto. So that's where we stand. Let's go to Gerald now.
So Gerald, let's start with you again. What your reaction as far as what was said in those voicemails, the fact that it was 10 years ago, the rumor there may be another tape, and all that has transpired this week?
So yeah, I think there are a few, I want to say there are 3 really big things that stand out about this particular argument. One is the sense of precedent, right? And understanding what Lee Haney's comment really meant in the sense of don't give it any attention. But what tacit compliance ultimately means for not giving this the appropriate airtime it deserves. I think second is the ethnicity issue. We talk about black versus white race relations in America. The tensions where that's set, since chattel slavery and what that means for African Americans, what that means for white Americans. And I think the other thing that we haven't really talked about is the misogyny issue around women, like how Rich Piana in this concept is really addressing women. All of us have a mother somewhere along the way. Most of us have partners along the way. And so I think those are the 3 big things that, we're talking about, he used the N-word. Okay, cool. But there's a couple other things that are really, really salient here too that we want to address. I think the first thing is a sense of in precedent here. We want to say, like, this is the first time I can recall of there being an extremely derogatory use of term against any ethnic group. And we're talking about the International Federation of Bodybuilding Global. That's been accounted, right? And so we take a separatist example of school shootings, right? Columbine, 1999, there was this huge, massive sense of attention. Everybody's like, oh my God, there was a school shooting. There have been 50 school shootings since Columbine, and none of them have received the type of magnitude and attention as the first one because it's a desensitization point, right? We're at an apex here in the sense of if we don't give this, if the appropriate precedent isn't set at this time of what these types of things mean and the gravity, because Rich Piana is not a pro bodybuilder. he's connected to the industry. And to that, we'll talk about like maybe some strategies about how to really appropriately manage where his relationship sits. But understanding that this is the apex in the sense of we have a chance to set the appropriate precedent for this, because most likely, it's not the first time something like this has happened. It's just the first time something like this has happened on tape. And much like we talk about the ethnicity issues, the election of 2016 really brought race to the forefront of America. That in conjunction with had this over and over this repeated sense of caught on video Black men being gunned down by white police officers, and we see continuously how officer after officer is acquitted. We have Oscar Grant here in Oakland, how the officer was acquitted. He actually did a little bit. Johannes Medley did a little bit of time. But you got Mike Brown, you've got the Tulsa shooting. These folks are being acquitted, so we do have a tenuous dynamic as far as race is concerned here in America. And you have to understand, like African Americans, we definitely have the most unique history here in America, because yes, we have the Asian Americans have a very difficult road, and we had the Japanese internment camps and things like that. And we definitely have these cultural, aberrations in the sense of the Hmong culture and Latino cultures and what that means here in America. And then also the immigration status and what that sits and how people are being positioned, and everyone fighting their own fight in that sense. But slavery, chattel slavery, really represents a very unique sector of American history and what that means for Blacks in America and how that operates, right? And so we're seeing this consistently play out. I think the assumption has been that we've made so much progress in America over time. Well, you're not living on the plantation, you're not being bought and sold, you're not living in the fields, you're not picking cotton, so things should be good. If that were the case, we wouldn't have had affirmative action through the mid-90s, and that being moved through the 2000s, and then we wouldn't have had other things along the way to support that process. So we recognize that there are inequitable outcomes economically, socially, educationally for Blacks in America. And we also talk about this concept of identity, white racial identity versus Black racial identity. It's okay to have an affinity towards your group. People typically do that all the time. That's just how we're wired socially. Social exchange theory, things like that. We always look at ways to create the least amount of conflict for ourselves. And typically that comes from within group association. And the last point I'll really speak to here in that sense is the gender component. I think in the sense of as any male interacting with a female or a partner, I think there's a sense of respect that should be upheld. And I think we've talked a lot about the race issue. And so, the race issue happens. We know that, as a Black man in America, I know that things aren't fair. It happens all the time. It doesn't mean that you always have an issue about it. It means you figure out what's going on, and you navigate the system to work to your advantage. But also women aren't being treated fair equally, right? Like, so we know, nationally the discourse is that women are making 80% of the money that men are for the same task. And if we think closely, like, yeah, Rich was using the N-word, but he was cussing her out. Like, he went totally in. All of us have been with a partner, I'm sure, that has pushed a button we did not know existed. But that doesn't give us the right to be disrespectful, to not communicate effectively, and those things. And that's an indictment on really his ability to self-regulate, self-manage, emotional intelligence, to know that I've reached my threshold. I need to back up and have this conversation later, opposed to going into a rant. His excuse of, I was at this point in my life and this is what was happening. That's a sign of immaturity, right? And if you're going to be in a space where you're a public figure trying to run a company, those are big challenges. And then the last area is really solutions, right? And we've seen this type of behavior before in different areas. You look at, the late or the mid 50s, in the civil rights movement, the bus boycott. It was successful, not because Black people stood up and said, fight the power. It was successful because 75% of the people that rode the bus in Montgomery County were Black. And so there was an economic impact, right? And so understanding that if people don't support Rich's company, then there's a way to impact him. Like, yeah, your apology is great, but there's a way to impact him that's meaningful, right? To say we are not supporting this. GNC, I think GNC is one of the largest distributors of him nationwide. We talk about what in the mid 80s, the divestment from American companies from South Africa looked like, and what the economic impact had on the inflation for their dollar, right? And so we say, if we take the same stance here and say, GNC, like, hey, that this dude is calling people the N-word, like, on camera, no matter if it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you can apologize. But I'm pretty sure GNC is not going to be happy about the fact that somebody that they're holding their products in the warehouse is calling people N-words on the phone, and it's all over the internet. And so I think that there are solutions, even still, and Rich has, a myriad of athletes for his company. I think it's the athletes too, having the ability to say, look, I'm a competitor, but you either give me hazard pay for sticking with you through this tough time, or you release me on an at-will termination. And I think
Gerald,
so there are a lot of ways. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, before I go to Chris, I just wanted to get, again, a couple of quick thoughts from you regarding this specific situation. Again, does it change your opinion or stance in any way, the fact that this was allegedly 10 years ago? And then a general thought from you as an IFBB Pro current in the sport right now, as far as the discourse that has taken place ever since that voicemail was revealed within the bodybuilding community.
I'll speak to the last question first. I think that people are talking about it. You know, as John said, I said I was going to agree with you on a point. You know, there's no, as the Wolf of Wall Street says, there's no bad publicity. So this is free marketing for this guy. It's unfortunate. I think that the athlete, my point stands, I think that the athletes that he supports, I really think they need to be mindful of what's happening. And sometimes I feel like as bodybuilders, I think the public generally assumes that we're all tuned into the sport. And I typically have been a bodybuilder that's really removed from the sport and more into my other aspects of life. And as I've gotten more back into it, I've had to plug back into, different media outlets a little bit more. And so the awareness of this, for me, really highlighted a lot of areas. One, this is really, we've got to say something about it. I think tacit compliance is a bad move. But I also think that you want to remove the emotional reaction. 10 years ago is 10 years ago. We've all said something that we may or may not be held accountable for. Granted, there may be some statute of legal limitation of what someone can be held to, but it's a part of who you are. And so we don't know how much he has or has not grown. We don't know the context of all the other things. All that stuff in aside, I think it's very, very, ironic that at the height of where he is in his career and with his business, this is coming out. Who knows what the play is for that? I think John spoke to that earlier. So I think there are a lot of collateral factors we're not really sure of. I mean, am I upset? Absolutely. Because I feel like, hip hop culture has made it okay. I mean, hip hop is the most dominant global culture. And every other word in most of the top 40 songs is N-word this, be this, N-word this, be this. I personally take a stance. I don't use the word. Like I haven't used the word in 15 years. I'm one of those people that believe there's so many other words in the vocabulary, there's no reason to use it. And a lot of people I associate with take the same stance. We don't use the word. I think it's marketing. I think it's a great, way people, I can be a part of this. And I think we're living in a dream world if we think that, white folks, when they're around black folks, won't say it, but I'm pretty sure that word happens all the time when we're not in the room. I played hockey for UC Berkeley, and one of my teammates said it, and I pulled him aside. I was like, look, you have a pass. This shit happens again, I will fuck you up. Right there. That was the last, and I did it in front of the locker room, in front of everybody, because I was the only black guy on the hockey team. The coach was black, but at that point, I didn't feel it was justified to have an issue. I had a student who's in one of my classes now who had a court case in a different state who missed his midterm because somebody called him the N-word. He's from California. He goes back to Virginia. Someone calls him the N-word, and he didn't have the tools to regulate in that moment. And so we live in a country where there's several places in the South and in the East where Jim Crow laws are still on the books. And so we have to be mindful of this, particularly as African Americans, that, sometimes not everybody's going to see everything how you want to see it. And the reality is that you can't get bent out of shape every time someone does that, because ultimately you might hurt yourself more than you really teach that person a lesson, because you're not going to stop the perpetual motion. But once again, that's why I say that there's got to be an economic. The apology isn't necessarily I'm sorry. The apology is to getting these larger organizations like the IFBB to not allow him to do booths at the Olympia and the Arnold, to get GNC to divest from his company, to have his athletes either once again receive hazard pay or at-will termination. And no one's marketing the products. I think that's really where it sits from an athlete's perspective of what's going on. And it's not to have a visceral response, because once again, I think, this is race relations in America. I mean, it's always been an issue, and it's very tenuous now that it was highlighted in the 2016 election. And so I think to get it bent out of shape every time someone uses the N-word that's not black, I think that's a little unrealistic.
Rich Piana himself, one of the biggest draws at any show that he is ever at, be it the Olympia, be it the Arnold, be it any of the European shows. 1.1 million followers on Instagram. Our producer, Johnny Styles, was going through his YouTube channel, and apparently he lost thousands this week. Chris Aceto, let's go to you on this one again. Everything that has followed in the wake of the revelation of that voicemail allegedly from 10 years ago. You've seen the 3 shows that we have had this week relevant to the topic and all the banter that has taken place in the bodybuilding world. Your thoughts?
My thoughts were his comments were extremely racist. The idea that what came out of his mouth is not racist and that people would defend him is just ridiculous. His tongue is tied to what's inside him. I mean, people say the eyes are the gateway to your soul. Well, your tongue is the gateway to how you feel. And the idea that it happened 10 years ago, maybe he's improved at his efficiency at becoming a racist in the last 10 years. I mean, there's an idea of like, well, it was 10 years ago that he's not racist now. It might be that it's 10 years and he's had the chance to like work at becoming a better racist. I don't know, but I'd like to play the devil's advocate, for people who apologize for him and make this claim that 10 years means that we should sweep it under the rug. The fact that he's leaving a message for a girlfriend or a spouse that cheated on him, well, the sin in there, the mistake is the cheating. Not that the guy that she was cheating on was a black guy. And you can hear him beat up her twofold. One, on the fact that the guy's black. And two, to agree with Gerald, he's beating her up and denigrating her for the fact that, she's cheating on him. And people come to her his defense on that. Well, she cheated on him. How do you know he didn't cheat on her? And it was just a get back. I mean, there's so many assumptions that are made in the equation. One thing that I'm not assuming is what came out of his mouth.
But do you get the sense that people have been apologizing from this week? I feel as if, throughout the course of the week, the banter that we've heard, for the most part, is, yeah, what he said was reprehensible. Sure, he regrets it, but I'm not sure. Elaborate a little bit more on your sentiment that there have been apologists for his actions this past week.
Well, I mean, I disagree with some of the things that John said about it. He defined, he nuanced what was said. And when you get into nuances, you get into, defending people that don't need defending. Those words that came out of his mouth are those words that came out of his mouth. If you're not sure that they're offensive, I mean, I have a 13-year-old. I can read them off to him and see if he thinks they're racist or not. In black and white terms, they're racist. Just reading them, hearing the strength and the aggressive tone and tenor he took on the message, makes them, to me, at that point, at that isolated point in time, how about that for making it easy on them? Extremely racist. I don't know how people would defend him not being a racist. I mean, I'm open-minded to hear other people on the panels, defend him and say, that he's not. But, I mean, the more I think of it, you can hear in my voice it's upsetting because it's just, we know that racism is a problem in the country. And the idea that, he said it, I've heard people say, well, he said it behind closed doors. Exactly. That's another insight into people's real psyche, is that people aren't going to go out and announce to the world I'm a racist and act like a racist, but it's behind closed doors. That's who people really are. When people generally, especially in bodybuilding, have two personas: the one that they put out there for people to see, and the persona that they have at home with their families or their friends or their spouses or whatever. And that's what's so disturbing about it, is you get a snippet or an insight into, the personal side of this person, whereas there's no way he's going to talk like that, amongst people in a public square.
I'm just reading his statement right now. This was posted 5 days ago about an audio tape floating around. We're going to get to the meat of it. It says, I lost my mind over the situation and said stuff I never meant. I've lost my mind many times, said a lot of effed up things. That word never comes out of my mouth, and I'm definitely not racist. We are all equals in this world, And this is something that I've always felt to put out there. John Romano, let's go to you if you care to respond to what Chris said in terms of his disagreement with some of your statements.
Sure. First of all, I want to thank Gerald for coming on the show and speaking so eloquently to the fact from his perspective and his community's perspective. And I think that's really something that we needed to have on here. And Gerald, I want to really thank you for speaking up and doing it so well. There's a lot to pull apart here, and it's kind of difficult to do it in a couple of minutes. But I want to address the first issue. Is I am not apologizing for Rich Piana. I'm giving my take on what could possibly be the issue. My whole position is contextual. I said this from my comment before, that it's the context of the situation that weaves its way through the whole thing on a lot of levels. Okay, anger is an incredibly powerful emotion. Anger motivated by the discourse between a male and a female in a tight situation is incredibly volcanic in a lot of ways. I mean, me personally, I spent 2 years in federal prison, 9 months of which was in MDC in LA with, Crips and, all kinds of crazy people and the dregs of humanity. And I have never been pushed to the limit as I have been pushed in a relationship with one of my exes. Okay, so I can't fathom any other place in time in my life where I could have been more angered by what a woman had done to me. Okay, custody battle, divorce, you name it, it's been done, and I'm sorry, but there's switches that women can flip in men's brains that make us do the most ludicrous things. Okay, anger, when you're angry, you want to look for, without being physical, you're on the phone with a woman. When you're angry, you want to look for the most powerful mechanism you can hit that person with, and especially in this case, guy-girl confrontation. And what you're doing is you're looking to be as ugly as possible. Here's what Rich did. I don't know Rich. I've never had a conversation with him. So I'm not his friend. I'm not his acquaintance. I don't work for him. I don't have anything to do with him. No way, no how. The only thing Rich and I have in common is we have an Italian last name. Okay, so, which brings me to my point. Back before the civil rights movement, the Jim Crow laws, the 3/5 of a man, in the Constitution, relevant to black people, was a horrible, horrible position to put a human being in, and it created a lesson that people taught to their kids, and this goes back. Kids are not born with any sense of differentiation of who's black, who's white, who's yellow, who's red, who's brown. We put them all in a playground. If they're 5 years old, they're all playing with each other. They're all happy. It's later on in life when they are taught the differences and the hatreds that go along with their lineage. Now, if you go back and you look at when, the turn of the century, when people were immigrating to America, we had Irish, Italians, Polish, from all over the world. And we all somehow got derogatory names because we came from somewhere else. We were looked down upon because we weren't WASPs. We weren't the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants that propagated America first. So Italians were wops and dagos and pizza boys, and Irish were mix and drunks, and Polish were Polacks, and you've got blacks called whites crackers and honkies, and we have bad names for everybody. Okay, what makes the N word the most ugly of all of them?
So John, I'll say this: you talked about the concept of immigration versus chattel slavery, colonists went to the coast of West Africa, bought and sold people, humans, put them in the bottom of boats, left them chained down there in their own feces and vomit, brought them over here to work without being free, and sold them back and forth up and down the colonial states of America, right? That's very different than saying I'm coming here for opportunity and I got a bad name. You know, like after so in the other just the other sense of this, you take about a cultural lineage, you know, and this is why I think there's such a tenuous relationship white-black in America in the sense because, you know, African Americans on one hand, you know, this concept of overt versus covert racism that Chris, you talked about. And that's why I say the election of 2016 was really highlighting, because I think we had all been living with this veneer of that racism in America has slowly edged itself out and we're coming more, we are the world, we are the children type of thing. And the reality is that this election really brought in this forefront of like, no, America still has a very, very clear delineation between black, white, and it became okay to be more of an overt racist. You know, it just like, you know, in states where it's okay to carry, it wasn't okay to carry, now it's okay to carry because they've been provided the privilege. So I just want to make that clear distinction of why is that word so different? Because we were brought here and we were bought and sold. We don't have a native language. We don't have a native culture. We don't have native dishes. You know, you think about soul food as a context are the scraps that people would get together and just make so they didn't starve. It wasn't like, oh, I've got pasta over here. And was something I brought over from Italy. No, this is like, we just had chitlins came from the fact that, you know what, like this is all we had. So we made it. And so I just want to say that's a clear delineation.
There is no question that there's a difference between how blacks came to America versus everyone else. Okay. And it is part and parcel to the reason why the N-word is probably the ugliest word there is. The word I won't ever even use ever. Okay. It's just for human to human, it's atrocious. Okay. So because of what it symbolizes, because it symbolizes the trip in the boat and the feces and the vomit and the working and the oppression and the 3/5 of the human of a man, it's all counter humanity. It's terrible. Okay, it is ugly, the ugliest that there is. So my position on this is if you're in an argument in a hate sponsored rage over what your girlfriend or your wife did to you, you're using that word to color the strength of your statement to make her as uglier than she is, because it's this. Okay, take the black man out of the situation. Put a snake in there. Put some other disgusting thing in there, and you're associating her with that disgusting thing to make her more vile and more,
So what would Rich use for a white accountant? She cheated with a white nerdy accountant.
Scumbag.
I mean, what vile and angry, weapon? How would he weaponize that? I mean, it's still going back to defend him.
I'm not defending him. What I'm saying is what was he doing is what I'm trying to say.
Sometimes anger, the flip side is anger often gives you insight to who people really are.
Absolutely.
Right? I get angry and I have a check and a balance. But even when I have a check and a balance, when I'm in a fight with Gerald, I don't debase Gerald. It's not in my stratosphere of thinking, frankly, that I'm going to introduce race into it.
Yeah.
And when I'm fighting with someone who's on a low socioeconomic ladder, it doesn't. I'm fighting with.
Let's bring Dave in here.
And I'm not going to.
Everybody's cutting out.
Yeah, Dave, I'm going to go to you on this one, Dave, again, because you figured that there was a need for this kind of a show. There was a need for this kind of a format, given the week that has led up to now and the fact that we now do have Gerald Williams on. We've had John Romano on, and he's going to, been elaborating his thoughts from yesterday's episode. Chris Aceto, has some rebuttals of what John Romano said. Let's get your thoughts on what has been said so far.
It's a tough discussion. I'll tell you why, because I do have a relationship with Rich Piana, and so I'm as disappointed as probably the next guy at what he said, because I didn't really think that was in his lexicon, but you don't really know a person, unless you spend a lot of time with them, or you put them into a stressful environment, and then who they really are comes out. So I could understand, that, something has to be done. Some sanctions have to be taken, whether they be economic sanctions where people don't buy his products, or, there be and that might not be fair only because, he's not the only owner of that company. Or there be sanctions by the bodybuilding organization. I don't know, that doesn't allow him to be certain places. I don't know what that answer is. It depends on what the court of public opinion wants. They have to demand that. And when Mel Gibson did those racist, tapes, I guess, similar to Rich, Hollywood banned them, because Hollywood is run by, there's a lot of Jewish people that run Hollywood, from the Steven Spielbergs to Tom Hanks and all those, people. And they really boycotted him. And he was really not persona non grata. He might still be, you see him a little bit now, but you don't see him. He was a megastar. I mean, he was like, what The Rock is today. That was Mel Gibson back in the day. So something's got to be done. And the reason why we're having these discussions, and if you don't want to hear it anymore, who's ever out there, don't listen, and I don't care. I think this is an important discussion because everyone pretends, oh, yeah, we love each other, and then something like this comes out, and we realize, what? The magic wand that was waved over us where we all think everything is great it's kind of been pulled away. We're seeing who's behind the curtain over there, and it's disturbing, to be quite honest. And I heard there's another tape out now with similar comments, so I haven't heard it yet, but I think that something needs to be done, because I think that if we just let it go, then we're just saying it's okay to have that kind of racism in our sport.
And Dave, that's what I meant by tacit compliance. If we do nothing, and we just give it. And Lee Haney, I have so much respect for him. I had an opportunity to train with him when I was an undergrad in Atlanta at Animal Kingdom before it was closed. And so, just who he is and what he means to the sport, I almost was like, I don't want to say anything because of the amount of respect I have for Lee Haney. But I also recognize that if we take the school shootings as an example of precedent, if we do nothing, this becomes very much so a precedent that we're setting, that it's okay. And I think we're still missing the concept here. Yes, we all have had someone that's a partner that's pushed our buttons, but as athletes and as heads of companies and media figures, we're held to a higher standard. My wife may make me absolutely crazy, but she does sometimes. But that doesn't mean, and Chris, I agree with you. We have our personas that we have in this industry, and then we have our personas at home. No, I don't.
Because okay,
do you be sure? That's what I'm saying.
No,
you understand.
But here's the point. You don't beat her. You could, meaning you have the power, right? The man has the power over the
regulation to not to.
So you don't go there for the same reason I'm critical. I would be critical if you did. Gerald Williams beats his wife. I wouldn't be here defending. Well, maybe she was out cheating on him. Maybe she took his money. Maybe she was, drive him crazy. So
right,
if you beat your wife, I'd be equally critical on the facts that she's got two black eyes and he's got a broken knuckles. And when it comes to the racist, rants, I say they are what they are. At least, without knowing, I don't need to know everything.
Well, right, okay. And it's not just about the racist. It's also I recognize the race component, but I also the misogyny component has to be addressed, right? There's so many women that support the sport that are, whether they're on the stage or behind the scenes or in the industry. And so we're us ignoring the concept that it's okay to even if your buttons are pushed, to be emotionally unregulated like that is not okay. And so that's a statement we need to also be able to stand with. Just like it's not okay to use the N-word out in public and there should be some sanctions, we also need to say that there's really a point where you need to learn as men that there's a certain level of appropriateness. And our own president has faced the same type of issue in the media of what that looks like and what that comes across as. And so once again, as a public figure, you're held to a higher standard and you need to act accordingly.
Gerald, so let's transition to the what can be done, right? And there are different layers to this topic because, for one, there is the Donald Sterling precedent, right? The former owner of the Los Angeles Clippers, the recordings of what he had said, very inflammatory statements, and that eventually led to him losing his NBA team. Now, far be it for Rich Piana to lose 5% nutrition over this, but again, to your point, if there is to be a precedent, what would you like to see, and what do you think is practical in this situation?
Yeah, I mean, this isn't the first time. Don Imus is another person that had the same type of scandal that went on years ago, right? And what that led and what that brought up. I mean, I think as much distance as the IFBB can put between Rich Piana and his company and itself, I think is better for it, because associating it, sponsoring shows, being at expos, things like that. I think the athletes are in a very precarious position, and that's why I said, they either ask for hazard pay or ask for at-will termination to be able to move. I think, once again, the supplement industry is an industry. It's a business. But we've seen examples in the past of what economic divestment can do to a company. GNC is a national distributor and one of the major distributors of 5% Nutrition. If you look kind of like state by state, I try to do a little bit of homework before I talk in public, just so that I don't sound crazy. But if you look through, GNC is pretty much one of their only national distributor. GNC, do the executives of GNC know that this is what's going on out there? And do they want to be associated with that? It's different if you're pooping under the carpet and nobody sees it, but when it's out in public, you're in public. And so I think that I do agree. I think the league should distance itself for a period of time until the image and the reputation are able to be repaired, because I do feel like the IFBB is pretty neutral. Like, if you look at the judging and the athletes and the things like that, it's pretty neutral. People have their debates about particulars of physiques and things like that, but there's never, and I haven't been around for a long time, but I've never seen anything like this inside of the sport. And I think as much distance as the league can put between itself and this is good news. And I think, once again, impact is felt through economics. The boycott, the apartheid, all those other things, Watts riots, like, people were putting signs in the windows in 92 and in 1965 about black owned, like, don't burn my store down. And that actually saved some people's businesses. And so there's an affinity, there's a proclivity to attacking something that's associated with you. And I think that if people are able to really have this economic impact, and it isn't fair to the other people that are associated, but guilt by association. I got told as a kid all the time, be careful of who you hang out with, because if they got dope in the car, they're taking you to jail too. They don't care who you are. And so that's a lesson to live by I think all of us got some type of guilt by association lesson in our early childhood, middle childhood, adolescence. And some of us may not have been paying attention to that lesson and paid the cost for that. And so those that are in business with him ultimately are in that guilt by association space. But there needs to be an economic, I'm sorry isn't good enough, but there needs to be an economic impact that says we are impacting his bottom line. And that's how we say collectively as an industry that this is not okay.
John and Chris, I want to kind of lay this to you. John, we'll go to you first on this one. To make it clear, Gerald is essentially calling for the IFBB and I guess the Olympic Committee, the Arnold Committee, and essentially GNC, who are carrying the 5% products, to distance themselves from the ban, and at least for these booth appearances for the time being. Gerald, so let's be clear. So you're saying for the time being that they should not be permitted, or that they should be distanced from allowing them to exhibit at their shows, correct?
I agree. I think that I think that they should not. I believe 5% nutrition shouldn't be allowed at any IFBB or NPC shows. I totally agree with that.
John, where do you stand on that kind of an action in response to these tapes?
I got to go back first and clarify something. Okay, the hate speech in the tape recording. Okay, Chris made a point. Okay, what do you call a white guy? We call each other a lot of bad things. That N word is specifically extra bad. Okay, so that's what inflames this whole thing. Because if it was a white guy, you could have said that fucking scumbag Mick, drunk Irish bastard. You could have gone on and on and on like that, and it would never have carried the weight that this outburst caused. Now, here's the difference. If you go back to the OJ trial, Mark Furman, one of the detectives on the case, the tapes came out, or a ex-girlfriend came out with tapes, him talking about using blacks as kickboxing practice and, target practice and genuine hate action.
Right.
When I spoke about, the race-ist, I used the suffix ist, what became, I tried to make the comment that when you use ist, that suffix, you become a person that is proficient at or in love with or enamored with what they are or what they do. And a racist is a person who is proud of and loves their race. Now, a white person who is proud of and in love with their race is put them back in the day, put them on a pedestal up here that sort of precluded anyone else to be as good as they were, and we created all kinds of lower class people that sort of infiltrated the society and became, everybody got their derogatory term. Granted, it's worse if you're black because of, as Gerald said, slavery was a non-voluntary, participation, and it created a tremendous amount of dehumanizing and devaluation of the human being, and that that was it made everything worse. Okay, so you can't put a color label on anything in terms of who's good and who's bad because of your race. Now Mark Furman is a hater. He's not a racist. He's a hater. When I say racist, I'm talking about the literal translation of the word. He's not proud of being white. He hates black people. And that was quite evident in those tapes of him as the window into who he really is. He hates black people. Uses them for target practice, kickboxing, kick practice. As Johnny Cochran said, it was a bombshell of a revelation. And it's true. That guy hates black people. And this, by saying the N-word in a fit of rage, okay, is a horrendous thing to do. Certainly you wouldn't do it in public. You're doing it on the phone to chastise and berate your woman. That's another thing. And I think that is, to Gerald's point, the bigger issue, the misogyny issue. It is quite obvious that Rich was using the N-word to berate a woman. And the misogyny aspect of this, I think, is a far greater issue than the race issue. Because, look, anybody can, in a fit of rage, spout off anything. And if somebody wants to use it against them, that's your prerogative. But I really don't think that is the basis of who he is. What he was using it for, to berate a woman, I think that's a bigger issue. The misogyny aspect of it is gigantic. And I think in our industry, what I love about bodybuilding is on a competition, it's really hard to tell the black people from the white people because everybody's all dyed black anyway. Okay? And it's kind of what I love about bodybuilding because it's colorblind. It's you are judged on how good your physique is. Doesn't matter what color you are because no one can tell. Okay? But man and a woman, yeah, you can tell. And there's a far bigger component of female participation in our industry. Bikini, fitness, figure, bodybuilding, is way more women participate in our sport than men. And I think for a person to represent their products and their service in our industry cannot hate women. And this outburst, this tape recording, is a window into not so much its racial views, although they're horrendous, period, and I'm not ever defended that, but I think the misogyny part of it is definitely the bad part. And what can we do about that? To answer your question, Sid, I don't know. Is hitting him in the pocketbook a hard thing to do? Yeah, it kind of is, because he's got his followers, and he may have lost a couple of thousand, but out of all of he has, it's like throwing a deck chair off the Titanic. It's not going to make a measurable difference in his income. Can you ban him from shows? I think some kind of reprisal is in order here, because he is adamantly voicing his disdain and his internal sense of right and wrong is perceived to how he treats women. And I think the fact that you can go off on a rant like that and berate a woman to that degree, using the N-word as a as a tool to make worse what he's trying to say to her. I mean, if there was a worse word than the N-word, he would have used it. I don't care what it came down to. He was trying to hurt her. He was trying to berate her, and that was his mission, not to inflict pain on a black person. He was trying to inflict pain on a woman, psychological pain on a woman. And I think that is the issue, and I think that's what needs to be looked at. And I think that is something that needs to be looked at, and what can you do about it? I don't know. I think banning him, not letting him, set up his booths, not letting, I think Gerald makes a great point about hazard pay for his constituents. I mean, if you're a woman and you're working for 5%, I think you ought to head for the nearest door and never look back. So, I think that while unfortunate that these tapes came out 10 years later, I think that this is a real signal into, what his position is when it comes to women. And if you're a woman and you support his company, I think that's a bigger issue than the race issue. So I don't know what to do about it. I mean, banning him, not letting him, sell his stuff. I think the community should take care of itself on here. And I think women should be voicing their disdain for this and standing up for the fact that this guy's a misogynist and has a terrible way of no matter, like Gerald said, and I think Chris alluded to it too, you got to always be conscious about, who's listening. And, as a public figure, and maybe he wasn't as big a public figure, or he definitely wasn't a public figure 10 years ago. Maybe he never could have dreamed that he would hold this position in our industry 10 years ago. But the words came out of his mouth. And the words came out of his mouth, and they came out of his mouth in a vehement despisal of his woman, his wife, no less. And that's the issue. And I think that's women have a great power in terms of how they can economically, affect his business, or how they can also affect his following. And I think women ought to talk to their significant others and say, hey man, you can't support this guy because of how he treats women. And I think the women here are the drivers behind what can be done about this, because it is absolutely abhorrent that you would use another race as a tool to denigrate a woman in the way that he did. And I think I'm agreeing with Gerald. I think that's the bigger issue here, and that's what needs to be addressed.
Chris, let's go to you again. What Gerald is suggesting is that there should be economic sanctions levied against Rich Piana's company in different shapes and forms, again, with the distributors and retailers that are carrying his product, and then, of course, perhaps suspending him from exhibiting at these big shows upcoming. Where do you stand on this?
Well, John just makes it sound like, and I disagree with that, he's a misogynist who's not a racist at all, just happened to choose
I never said he was
race
not racist.
John, you know what? Probably every single male that we all know has had some type of altercation with the female at some point and raised his voice because he has the ability to raise his voice. But they don't take it down into the gutter and introduce race.
That's the point.
Issue.
That's the misogyny part of it.
We're not talking about immaturity and checks and balances. The elephant in the room is race. The elephant is not misogyny. And to paint it with a brush that, well, we gotta address these issues of how women are treated. They only get 80 cents on the dollar, and the fact is, a black guy walks into a room and a white female walks into the room, any room. Generally in that room, there's a totem pole of respect that people have, or there's assumptions that people have of the woman and of the black man. So, I want to keep the focus on the racial aspects of what was said. because those are very, those can't be just dismissed, you know, and you know, like they were meant to hurt, but they were meant to attack, and they were used as tools to inflame, and they do inflame, and you know, every culture, everyone gets in fights with their spouses, but to take it to that level, you know, is something altogether different. You know, people can talk about, you know, what they want to happen from it. Before I think you know, take it to that level, you have to still define it. Was it racist or not? And, you know, you can just read it in the transcript and it sounds racist. And then you can hear it with the voice and how it's used, how aggressively it's used, and how poignantly it's used, and it becomes racist. And
you're making my point for me.
No, I'm not making your point. I'm not making your point. Yes, John, I'm not making your point.
Was he denigrating the black guy, or was he denigrating the wife?
He was introducing race. He was denigrating them both by that word. By her, he was denigrating the guy who he does not even know, and devalued him into just being black. And he was denigrating his wife and piling on using him.
And right, exactly. He was using him to denigrate her. So
was it racist or not, John? Was it racist or not?
Yes, it was racist. Okay. So, yes, it was racist, but it was more misogynist than racist.
I disagree.
I mean, as a point of context,
you don't know that, actually. You don't know that.
It's pretty evident in the recording is what he was doing.
Because you don't know that.
He wasn't congratulating her for the great job she did that day. He was denigrating her. He was absolutely attacking her and denigrating her for whatever reason, using a black man as a tool to denigrate her.
Well, and we're talking about. I thought we're debating, is it racist or not? Okay, so
it's definitely.
Gerald, let's get you on this.
It's racist.
So the concept of this, right? Like, yes. So we have to take the general stance that the N-word is not a good word in general. Period. I don't care how many songs it's in, how many movies it's in, how cool it is, what the kitsch, pop culture thing is. It's not an okay word, and so we all need to make a choice in that sense to not use it. I think there's a social expectation that's written or unwritten that says if you're not black, don't use it. But it also should transfer across the board. If you're black, don't use it. So I agree in the sense, yeah. Was he being racist? Absolutely, because he's using a racial slur to attack this woman, and is it misogynistic? Absolutely, because he didn't make mention of it being like it doesn't matter that he's a man. Like he put the fact that he's a black man, right? And so because he's a black man, now it's a problem.
Well,
right?
Joe, do you think it's an isolated incident? Do you think it was an isolated incident? Only time. Okay, so to John's point, you know what? He used the N-word to denigrate and be a misogynist with his wife. You don't think he's used the N-word against men?
He's at the party. He's using it at parties. He's using it in the car. He's sitting home with two short songs. That's
so
what
don't
he's
make
doing.
it sound like it's in this isolated, weird little incident where he got into a huffy with his wife and's using it because he's really a misogynist more than he is a racist. I don't really care if he's more of a misogynist more than a racist. Well, you know what? Actually, Gerald, what do you think in this country?
He's both.
Is racism a big issue or is misogyny a big issue?
They're both issues, right? You can't say that women not having equal treatment are big issues. You can't say, equitable.
Let me say this. A black guy goes into a St. Louis and steals a chocolate bar and he gets a cap in his back.
He's going to jail. You don't even have to stop. He's going to jail.
You think a woman goes in there, a white woman goes into the same store, in front of the cashier puts it in. Do you think she gets a cap in her head? Okay, so
absolutely not.
That's the litmus test for is misogyny a bigger issue or is racism a bigger issue in this country?
I think you have the same question, right? Because a black woman goes in the same space and may end up with the same challenges, right? And so
that's why I didn't use her. That's why I didn't use her.
Right, race is salient. Race is very salient in the sense is right. There is a hyper awareness, particularly with how black men and women are treated in this country, about how things work. I think the concept here is that, as Chris, to your point, there's a hierarchy of privilege when you walk into these spaces about where white men, white women, black women, Asian men, Asian women, Latino women, where everyone sits in this hierarchy along this continuum, or hierarchy or continuum. I would say it's probably more of a hierarchy of how people are seen. So specifically addressing the Rich Piana issue, was it racist? Absolutely. Do I feel like this is an isolated incident? Absolutely not. I feel like that word is a part of his vocabulary. Just like his ability to have his lack of respect for women is also a part of his character, right? And so we have the room is big enough for two elephants. There are two animals sitting in this room. And I think I think which one is more important is debatable, right? I think John is right. He's saying, like, because the dude is black, it's bad. So you're saying that you made a bad choice in the person you're with. And to Chris, what you're saying is the point is like the fact that he considers the black man bad is a bad issue. I think they're both very poignant ideas, but the reality is that they're both bad concepts. Like the fact that he sees black people, black men or women, regardless where you are, as less than, using that term because he's created a comparison in that space, saying because he was not the white accountant, but he was the black man, it's bad. And the fact that he's taking that stance to say it's okay to approach her in this way with that tenor and not have that emotional regulation, we've got two animals in the room, two big ones. I don't know which one is more important in that sense. They're both really bad, that's why there should be some type of systemic consequence.
Dave Palumbo, let's go to you. Final word on this one. Obviously, this is a very heated topic, and misogyny has been discussed. Racism has been discussed. But the point that Gerald brought up is that there needs to be some sort of an economic reaction from the bodybuilding world, be it the top organizations, be it from the fans. Where do you stand on that? Is there an economic reaction needed in this case?
You know, I wasn't totally able to answer that question before the show, but after hearing all these viewpoints, I was very educated. I think Chris and Gerald and John, everyone made some really valid points here, and I think that there has to be something done. Or like Gerald said, it's going to get swept under the carpet and people are going to lose. There's got to be some kind of consequences here. You know, what he did was unacceptable. He is not the janitor who cleans up the expo after it's over. He's the guy who's the star of the expo. He's the guy that people are going to see. You know, we cannot let him portray himself as something that he's not. You know, there has to be some ramifications of what he did. Otherwise, he will not change. You know, can people be forgiven and can they say, you know what? I screwed up, man. Yeah, but I think that they're not going to do that if you don't put your kid in timeout, he's going to keep doing what he's doing. If my son wants to climb on the couch and jump off the top and land on his head, falling on his head is not going to stop him. I have to do something to show him that there's a consequence to what he's doing. And I think that Rich needs a consequence. How it is enacted, I don't know, but I know that the organization that run these expos can certainly do something about it. I think that the public can do something about it in terms of what they purchase. And I think that the distributors that carry his product can do something about it. So look, Lance Armstrong was fired from Livestrong, his charity. You know, he's no longer, he started the thing and he's not with them anymore because they felt that he was a poor role model given, what happened with the Tour de France and him getting, caught cheating and having to admit that he used performance-enhancing drugs. So there is always ramifications. And if there's not, it basically reinforces that the person can continue doing what they're doing. So I think that something has to be done. And I'm glad this show came out and that people out there are listening to it. I know we have a lot of viewers out there who can make their own decisions about what they want to do economically speaking. And hopefully the powers that be watch this show. I know they do. And can make some decisions about this because it will set a precedent for future. There will be future racists in our sport, I guarantee it, and future problems that pop up. But if we nip this thing in the bud now, maybe it won't. Maybe we'll somehow put an end to it, or at least limit what could possibly happen in the future. And really, that's all that needs to be said. I don't think we're going to do any more shows on this unless some other blockbuster tape comes out. But I'm glad that we got this final closure on what was said over the last the last 7 days or so on our site with all the different people giving their opinions.
Well, you've heard from Dave, you've heard from Gerald Williams, from Chris Aceto, from John Romano. Let's hear from you. Comment in the section below. We'd love to hear what everybody has to say. We've obviously gotten a lot of reactions throughout the course of the week, stemming from the voicemail left by Rich Piana, and then, of course, the programs that we have put out. So leave your comments below, and certainly we'll be in touch. But like Dave said, for the time being, this should sort of put a bow on this topic. Special thanks to Gerald Williams, John Romano, Chris Aceto, and Dave Palumbo. I'm Sadiq Faruqi. For our producer, Johnny Styles, it's Iron Debate. We'll see you next time.